Section 20 of A Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wayne Anderson, Chelsea, Quebec. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woodes Rogers. At the Cape of Good Hope. The 27th of December we came up with Cape Falso, betwixt which and the Cape of Good Hope there's a deep bay, and about a third over from the cape there's a shoal which breaks for a good distance, but plain enough to be seen. By noon we were abreast of the cape, and saw the table land south latitude 34°14. The 28th we had very hard flaws of wind off the high land, till we came within sight of the Lion's Head and Rump, 2 hills over the Cape Town. This day we arrived in the harbour of the Cape, saluted the Dutch fort with 9 guns, and were answered by 7. We anchored in 6 fathom water, about a mile off shore, and found only 1 English ship, called the Donegal, Captain Cliff, commander, homeward bound from Mocha, and 2 Middleburgers outward bound for Batavia in the harbour, besides the guard ship and 2 or 3 galliots. The 29th we moored our ship and got down our yards and topmasts to guard against the hard flaws of wind off the tableland, which frequently blow very fresh betwixt east, southeast, and southeast. We sent 16 sick men ashore. We spent till the 18th of January, 1710-11, in watering and refitting, and then held the following committee. On the 18th the committee met ashore and agreed as follows. The 3 ships wanting several necessaries and provisions, we agree that Captain Rogers and Captain Courtney do bring 100 weight of plate ashore from either Duke or Duchess, and 60 ounces of unwrought gold, with all the coined gold or silver that is in both ships. We likewise empower them, in conjunction with Captains Dover and Cook, to purchase what necessaries are wanting for the whole, and to sell what goods are fit to be disposed of here, if not too much to our disadvantage, rather than exchange more gold or silver. We also desired they would agree for a cable and anchor, now wanting for the Duke, in place of her sheet anchor and cable, lately put aboard the Bachelor, for her security. Thomas Dover, President, Robert Fry, Woodes Rogers, John Connolly, Stephen Courtney, Lan Appleby, William Dampier. On the 1st of February I offered some proposals in writing to Captains Dover and Courtney, with the rest of the committee, wherein I told them 'twas my opinion we should lose too much time to stay for the Dutch fleet, in order to have the benefit of their convoy to Holland, which would not only be out of our way, but very tedious and chargeable. And we, having large quantities of decaying goods on board, the time we should lose by waiting for the Dutch might be advantageously employed in Brazil, where we could lie in with very little danger of the enemy, and vend them at great rates, and thence get to Bristol through the North Channel, having the summer before us, continuing in the latitude of 55 or 56 degrees, 200 or 300 leagues before we get the length of the north of Ireland, and by that means might avoid the track of the enemy. I earnestly pressed that, if they could not agree to this, one of our privateers might take this run alone, and the other keep with the Bachelor and Dutch fleet. But the majority was against anything but going home with the Dutch fleet altogether, so that all I could do more was to remind them of examining the goods aboard the Bachelor, and to take out of her so much goods in safe package as would lie in the like room of European goods on board the Duchess, that if any accident should happen to the Bachelor, we might have part of her value in another bottom. I desired, if any amongst them were not of this opinion, they would give their reasons for the contrary in writing, but we could agree to nothing, so I was forced to yield to the majority of a committee to go home with the Dutch fleet, and having a good conveyance by 2 ships to advise our owners, I wrote 'em a full account of all our transactions since we left Grande, and all other matters relating to the voyage, and also sent what we had agreed in the committee to our owners, which was as follows. Gentlemen, at the Cape of Good Hope. This is to acquaint you of our safe arrival at the Cape of Good Hope, December 29th, 1710, with our prize, the Acapulco ship, called Nuestra Senora de la Encarnacion y Desengaño, commanded by Mr. John Peshberty, and now called by us the Bachelor frigate, mounted with 20 great guns and 20 brass, and manned with 116 men, a firm ship, and each of our ships are manned with 120 men each, in company with 3 English East India ships, and do expect 3 sail more every day. The Dutch ships from Batavia, which are 12 sail of stout ships, are expected here every hour, and 6 sail more from Ceylon, which fleet we are resolved in council to accompany to Holland, except we have an account of peace, or happen to meet with an English convoy in crossing our latitudes. Our ships are all fitted with everything necessary, and only wait for the fleet, which we expect will sail by the last of March, hoping God will so direct us that we shall come with speed and safety to yourselves and the rest of our friends, to whom we render all due respects, and remain, gentlemen, your most humble and most obedient servants, Thomas Dover, President, William Stretton, Woodes Rogers, Charles Pope, Stephen Courtney, Thomas Glendall, Edward Cook, John Connolly, William Dampier, John Ballot, Robert Fry. We being now likely to spend so much time here, and the Duke having been very leaky all the way betwixt Batavia and this place, and considering the long passage we had to England, I moved to the council that we might go to Sardinia Bay to careen. 'Twas debated some time before betwixt me and Captain Courtney, pro and con, and to be further satisfied, on the 13th Captains Cook, Fry, and Stretton were appointed to come aboard, and we had a survey of carpenters concerning the leak. After some rummage, they agreed 'twould be very dangerous to attempt anything within board, and no other way but careening would do, which Captain Dover and the majority would not consent to, so that we are forced to lie in as bad condition as ever, only now and then mitigate the leak with a bonnet, which is of no long continuance in the harbour, and much less when we come to sea. This day about noon the Batavia fleet came in, being 11 sail. The fort saluted the flag with 21 guns, and all the English ships saluted likewise, except mine, which being upon the heel could not do it. February 26th. Having been very weak and kept my chamber for several days, but now something better, I send for most of my officers ashore, that I might be thoroughly satisfied what was wanting aboard, in order to go home with the Dutch fleet, and being too weak and made uncapable of assisting to get anything, I delivered in the said account to Captains Dover, Courtney, and Cook, with the rest of the committee, that we might not be hurried to sea without necessaries for subsistence. On the 27th we made a rummage for bale goods to dispose of ashore, having leave of the governor, and provided a storehouse, where Captain Courtney, with the owner's agent, took their turns weekly during the sale of them. Nothing remarkable happened till the 3rd of April, but that on the 13th of March 4 Dutch ships came in from Ceylon, 3 of them having lost their main masts, and being otherwise much damaged by a violent storm they met with in latitude 18 south. I took in more water and provisions, sent more goods ashore to the storehouse, and disposed of 12 negroes. On the 28th of March a Portuguese ship from Brazil came in with advice that 5 stout French ships attempted Rio Janeiro, but were repulsed, and had a great number of men killed and 400 taken prisoners by the Portuguese. April 3rd. Being in a readiness to sail, the flag came off shore, and was saluted first by the Dutch and then by all the English ships, but a contrary wind prevented our sailing. Most of the goods sold at the Cape were taken out of the Duke, being in much worse package than those aboard the Duchess and Bachelor, so that most of our bales that could be come at have been opened, and we find abundance of damage, our ship having been so leaky that we have not a tight place in the ship fit to secure dry goods. April 5. At daybreak this morning the flag hoisted a blue ensign, loosened his foretopsail, and fired a gun as a signal to unmoor. As we were heaving in our cable, it rubbed against the oakum, which had got into the leak, and occasioned the ship to be as leaky again as ever, she having been indifferent tight for some time, and we were in hopes it would have continued. About noon I came aboard very thin, and in no better health than I was when I went first ashore at our arrival here. Presently after I went aboard the Flag, there being a signal made for all the English commanders. We had before received our orders, which were very particular, and as obligatory to be punctually observed. About 4 in the afternoon, the Flag, Vice, and Rear Admirals weighed, with part of the fleet, and fell down to Robins or Penguin Island, where they lay for the rest of the ships. April 6. In the afternoon we all weighed from Penguin Island, 16 Dutch and 9 English ships, having a fresh breeze at south-southeast. At the Cape of Good Hope. We buried ashore here George Russell, a foremast man, December 30th, 1710. John Glasson, died 5th of January. Mr. Carlton Vanbrugh, owner's agent, 3rd of February. Mr. Lancelot Appleby, 2nd mate, 21st, and 4 deserted. Here follows a list of the ships that arrived during our stay at the Cape. All those homeward bound are now in company with us, except Captain Opie in the Oli, and a Dane that sailed in February, designed home before us. The ships that arrived at the Cape while we were there. Donegal, Captain Cliff, found here, from Mocha, bound to England. A Dutch ship arrived January 6 from Batavia and bound thither. Loyal Bliss, Captain Rob Hudson, arrived January 10 from Bengal, bound to England. A Dane arrived January 15 from Trincomber, bound to Denmark. A Dutch ship arrived January 16th from Zealand, bound for Batavia. Blenheim, Captain Parrott, January 22nd, arrived from Mocha, bound to England. Oli, Captain Opie, arrived January 25 from Batavia, bound for England. A Dutch ship arrived February 4th from Holland, bound to Batavia. The Batavia fleet, 11 ships, arrived February 22, bound to Holland. The Ceylon fleet, 4 ships, arrived March 7, bound for Holland. Loyal Cook, Captain Clark, arrived March 12 from China, bound for England. Carlton, Captain Lytton, arrived March 17 from Batavia, bound for England. King William, Captain Winter, arrived March 26 from Bengal, bound to England. A short description of the Cape of Good Hope. I shall not trouble the reader with what has been writ by others concerning this noted place, and since I had neither time, health, nor permission to ramble the country, I can relate no adventures that we had with bears, tigers, or Hottentots, but what I shall say is from my own observation, a description of the Cape of Good Hope. The Dutch have here a well-built small town containing about 250 houses, with a church and several fine gardens and small vineyards near it. There are divers villages in the country, from 10 to 30 miles distance, and scattering plantations near 100 miles from the Cape, so that from the whole they are supposed to be capable of raising 3,000 well-armed horse and foot at a short warning. The climate, being in about 35 south latitude, is excellent and healthful, and the soil very fruitful. They have many pleasant seats in the neighborhood, with gardens, vineyards, and plantations of young oaks and other trees raised by themselves, there being no large timber nearer than 50 miles off the Cape. I was informed that these farms and plantations bring in their East India Company a considerable sum per annum, besides maintenance for the garrison. They let the land so cheap for encouragement of planters, and it produces such a large increase of corn, wine, and cattle, that it enables the people to pay a great excise for their commodities, which are also continually exported for the Dutch settlements in India, and spend in recruiting their fleets that stop here, so that in a few years they hope this place will be so considerable as to afford them recruits on any occasion for their garrison in India, and if they be pressed by a war there, they may always lodge such a number of men as this noble settlement, which they esteem a second fatherland, as may arrive at India in so good a condition that no European power can be so capable of holding the India trade as themselves. This makes me think it to have been a great omission in our East India Company to quit this settlement for St. Helena, which is no way comparable to it, nor able to answer the same end. Among other advantages, the Dutch have here a noble hospital, furnished with physicians and surgeons as regularly as any in Europe, and this hospital is capable of entertaining 600 or 700 sick men at one time, so that as soon as the Dutch ships arrive here, their distempered men are put ashore, and they are supplied with fresh men in their stead. They have all sorts of naval stores here, with proper officers to attend on all occasions, which is a mighty addition to their strength, and enables them to preserve their India trade. An express comes hither annually from Holland by a small ship to meet their homeward bound East India fleet, which is generally from 17 to 20 great ships. The express brings a private order to the commander-in-chief, who is appointed by the government in India, so that none knows where they are to meet their convoy in the North Seas but himself, and he gives it sealed up to each ship, to be opened in a proper latitude near home. By this method their fleets have for many years escaped the enemy and arrived safe in Holland. Their form of government, their industry and neatness abroad, is justly to be admired and worthy to be imitated. I saw nothing I could blame, unless it be their severity, for which no doubt they have very good reason, though it seemed harsh to me, who was born with English liberty. They have an island called Robin, which lies at the entrance of the Cape Bay, about 3 leagues from the town, where they confine mutineers, or other heinous offenders, to hard labor during life, by sentence of the fiscal. The Dutch generally send a ship every year from hence to Madagascar for slaves, to supply their plantations, for the Hottentots, who are very numerous and love their liberty and ease so much that they cannot be brought to work, even though they should starve. I spoke with an English and an Irish man, who had been several years with the Madagascar pirates, but were now pardoned and allowed to settle here. They told me that those miserable wretches, who had made such a noise in the world, were now dwindled to between 60 or 70, most of them very poor and despicable, even to the natives, among whom they had married. They added that they had no embarkations but one ship and a sloop that lay sunk, so that those pirates are so inconsiderable that they scarce deserve to be mentioned. Yet if care not be taken after a peace to clear that island of them, and hinder others from joining them, it may be a temptation for loose straggling fellows to resort thither, and make it once more a troublesome nest of freebooters. The Dutch have seldom less than 500 soldiers in the Cape Castle, which is very large, built with stone, and has 70 guns well mounted on its ramparts, with convenient dwellings for the officers and soldiers, but it lies too deep in the bay to protect the ships in the road. Therefore they talk of erecting a battery on the starboard sandy point as you enter the bay. The road is so much exposed to the sea that in the winter months, when the wind blows strong from thence, it is unsafe riding, and ships are very often lost here, so that whoever comes hither in that season ought to be well provided with cables and anchors to ride out a storm. But in the summer it seldom blows from the sea, yet scarce a day passes without very strong flaws at southeast, which come down from the Table Mountains that lie over the fort, so violently that boats cannot go to or from the ships but in the morning and evening, when it is generally very moderate and calm. The Dutch have found out a noble hot spring of water about 100 miles up in the country, which is of excellent virtue against all distempers contracted in India, so that few have been carried thither, though in a desperate condition, but they have recovered to admiration by drinking and bathing in that water. This place having been so frequently described by others, I shall only add that I found the character of the Hottentots to be very true, and that they scarce deserve to be reckoned of the human kind. They are such ill-looked, stinking, nasty people. Their apparel is the skins of beasts. Their chief ornament is to be very greasy and black, so that they besmear themselves with stinking oil or tallow and soot, and the women twist the guts of beasts or thongs of hides round their legs, which resembles a tobacco roll. Here's plenty of all sorts of beasts and fowl, wild and tame, and in short there's nothing wanting at the Cape of Good Hope for a good subsistence, nor is there any place more commodious for a retirement to such as would be out of the noise of the world than the adjacent country in possession of the Dutch. Nothing remarkable happened till the 1st of May, only I continued very ill, as my ship did leaky, and sometimes we, sailing from the Cape towards Europe, had thunder, lightning, rain, and squalls of wind. Yesterday afternoon we had sight of the island of St. Helena, bearing northwest by north, about 6 leagues, lying in south latitude 16. On the 7th we made the island of Ascension, south latitude 8-2, longitude west from London 13-20. On the 14th at noon we found we had just crossed the equator, being the 8th time we had done so in our course round the world. There was a strong current setting to the northward, after the rate of about 1 mile an hour, longitude west from London 21-11, so that we have run much continually to the westward, over and above the circumference of the globe. The 17th in latitude 3-13 we found the current still continuing to set to the northwest 20 miles in 24 hours. The Dutch Commodore was very civil to us, and because our prize sailed heavy, he allowed her to keep ahead in the night, which he did not to any other ship. We and the Duchess often towed her in the day to keep her up with the fleet. June 7, in the latitude of 24-55. The 3 admirals hauled down their flags and hoisted pennants at their main topmast heads to appear more like ships of war, every Dutch ship doing the same. Now we draw near home, they scrape and clean their ships, bending new sails, so that they look as if they newly come out of Holland. June 13. Yesterday afternoon the flag made a signal for all the Dutch commanders to go aboard with their latitude and longitude. We took the Bachelor in tow this morning, having a fine moderate gale at east by north, with smooth pleasant weather. June 14. We cast the Bachelor off about 5 yesterday afternoon, I being unwilling to run too far ahead with her. Now we are got so far to the northward, where we may expect not only the danger of the enemy, but also veerable winds and thick weather, by which means she may lose the fleet. I advised Captain Courtney the same in the evening by a letter. This morning we rummaged our hold and found very little new damage amongst the bales, but all in general much decayed by lying so long in ordinary package. June 15. The Admiral made a signal this morning for all the English commanders and some of the Dutch skippers to come aboard him, where we found an excellent entertainment, and the good humour of the Dutch Admiral soon made all the company understand each other without a linguist, though we had much ado to get one at first meeting. We parted before the sunset, and had a fine day. June 28. Being got into the latitude of 51 north, we had thick foggy weather, so that the flag fired 2 guns every half hour. Each ship answered with 1. This continued several days, which consumed a great deal of powder, but by the noise of the guns it was easy to keep company, though sometimes so thick for several hours that we could not see 3 ships' lengths. July 14. This morning we fancied we saw land, and some of the Dutch ships made the concerted signal, but none was positive, having sounded and found no ground with above 100 fathom of line. July 15. We saw 2 ships yesterday afternoon, one of which we spoke with, being a Dane bound for Ireland. She told us the wars still continued, but gave a very imperfect account of any other news. She informed us of the Dutch men of war that were cruising for us off Shetland, being 10 sail, whom she saw 4 or 5 days ago, and reckoned herself now about 40 leagues from the land. We had soundings then in 70 fathom water, brown gravelly ground. I just had time to send the owners a copy of my letters from the Cape of Good Hope, and to let them know we were now got so far safe towards the conclusion of a fatiguing voyage. In the morning we made Fair Island and Foul Island, lying off Shetland, presently after we saw the men of war, but having little wind, and they a good way distant from each other, we could join but one of them by noon. Fair Island then bore south-southeast, distant about 2 leagues. July 16. All the men of war joined us yesterday afternoon, but 1 or 2 with the fishing doggers, who were cruising off the northeast of Shetland. After mutual salutations, both by the Dutch and English ships, one of the men of war was sent out to see for the missing ships. Meanwhile the fleet lay by, and having little wind, the boats came to and fro all night, and supplied us with what we wanted. The inhabitants of those islands came aboard with what provisions they had, being very poor people, who subsist most by fishing. Arrival at the Texel, July 17. In the morning we had a small breeze, with which the men of war got into the fleet again, having met with the other. About noon we all made sail, steering away betwixt south, southeast, and southeast, and the winds at southwest and southwest by south. I wrote a single letter to the owners in general by a Scots fishing boat belonging to Shetland, advising them of our joining the men of war, who are ordered with the fleet to the Texel, where I hope we shall soon meet an English convoy. The Dutch India Admiral, though but a company's ship, wears his flag, and gives signals and orders to the Dutch men of war, which is not suffered among the English, and in the whole run from the Cape have kept an exact discipline in the fleet, not suffering any of the commanders to go out of the ships to visit each other at sea without his signal or leave. July 21. This morning one of the men of war was ordered away for the Texel, to give notice of the fleet's coming. I again wrote to the owners, for fear of any miscarriage by the former conveyances. July 23. The weather being close, the Commodore made a signal about 10 o'clock for seeing land. Presently, after all, the fleets answered him with their colours. The pilot boats coming off aboard the ships, we had 2 aboard, who told us the Texel bore about southeast by east, distant 15 or 16 miles. Presently after noon we parted with the Rotterdam and Middleborough ships, most of the men of war going with them to see him safe in. The flag and all the English ships saluted the Commodore, and afterwards we saluted the flag himself to welcome him in sight of Holland. And as soon as they got over the bar, the Dutch men fired all their guns for joy of their safe arrival in their own country, which they very affectionately call Fatherland. All the ships bound into the Texel lay by from 2 till 5 o'clock, waiting for the flood to carry us up. About 8 at night we all came safe to an anchor in 6 fathom water, about 2 miles offshore. On the 24th in the morning the Dutch flag weighed in order to go up to the unlivering place. As he passed by us we gave him 3 huzzas and 9 guns. In the afternoon I went up to Amsterdam, where we had letters from our owners to direct us how to act and proceed from hence. On the 28th the English East India ships had orders to be in readiness for sailing with the first Dutch convoy for London. We got some provisions aboard from Amsterdam on the 30th. When I came aboard on the 1st of August, by consent of our council, we discharged what men we'd shipped at Batavia and the Cape, and afterwards went away from Amsterdam. On the 4th the Duchess and Bachelor went up to the road, called the Victor, being a better road than the Texel. In the evening we had news of some of our owners being at the Helder. Mr. Pope went to wait upon him, and in the morning came aboard with them. After a short stay they went for the Duchess and Bachelor, designing thence for Amsterdam. We welcomed them with 15 guns at their coming and going. The English East India ships and others bound for England weighed with the Dutch convoy today, having a fine gale at northeast. On the 6th we weighed from the Texel and went up to our consorts, it being by a particular order from the owners for our better security, we being obliged to wait there, fearing the India Company would be troublesome, although we had dealt for nothing but necessaries in India. On the 10th in the afternoon the owners with the chief officers came down, and the next day went ashore to the Texel, where, having an abstract of our voyage ready drawn up, we went before a notary public, and took our affidavits, that what was therein contained was true to the best of our knowledge, and that we had been at no other places than therein mentioned. This was desired of us by James Holland, Esquire, one of our owners, to justify our proceedings to the Queen and Council, in answer to what the East India Company had to allege against us, they being, as we were informed, resolved to trouble us, on pretence we had encroached upon their liberties in India. On the 12th we returned aboard again to keep up a form of government. Though the owners were here, we held a committee, where it was agreed to carry a quantity of gold to Amsterdam to exchange for a supply of our men and ships, viz. 20 guilders to a sailor, 10 to a landman, and to every officer in proportion as his occasions required. On the 13th we went away for Amsterdam, but did not carry any gold out of our ships, upon consideration it might be prejudicial to the insurance made on our ships, if we took any value out, and an accident should afterwards happen. So we agreed again 'twould be better to take up the money at Amsterdam. We had several stores and provisions from Amsterdam this week, and likewise money for the officers and men, which was paid them, and they had liberty to go ashore by turns. Transactions in Holland. On the 23rd in the afternoon the owners came down from Amsterdam, and the next day examined the prisoners aboard us and the Bachelor, about taking the said ship and other prizes, having notice of our going over for England, and that a convoy was appointed to come for us. We got all the men off shore who had been very troublesome to the owners at Amsterdam, and everything in readiness for sailing. On the 31st Mr. Hollidge came aboard, the rest of the owners being gone over for England, and took account of what plate, gold, pearl, etc. was in the ship. The same being done aboard the Duchess, he likewise took a list of our men to get protections for them from being impressed after our arrival in the river of Thames. The next day he went to the Texel to discharge the custom due from our ships, and on the 5th in the morning he took his leave of us. On the 19th in the afternoon we had news of our convoys lying without the Texel, which was very acceptable to the crews of each ship, who were in the utmost uneasiness at our long stay, being just at home, so that we had much ado to keep the companies aboard till now. We got everything in readiness in order for falling down to them. On the 20th, about 5 in the afternoon, we got down to the Texel, where we found our convoy at anchor, being the Essex, Canterbury, Medway, and Dunwich men of war. On the 22nd in the morning, the wind being at northeast, we weighed from the Texel, and by 10 of the clock got clear of the channel. In the afternoon the Commodore took the Bachelor in tow, and next morning, the wind being against us, we bore away again for the harbour, as did likewise 4 Dutch men of war that came out with us, bound for London. After seeing us safe in, he stood off to the northward with the Canterbury and Medway, but came in the next morning. On the 25th our officers met, where consulting that our 3 ships wanted several necessaries to keep the sea, in case we should meet with bad weather, we requested Captain Roffey, our Commodore, that he would please to stay, should the wind be fair, till such time as we could be provided with the said necessaries from Amsterdam, which was granted. On the 13th, the wind continuing at S.E. by S. and S.E., at break of day we weighed, as did likewise 4 Dutch men of war. On the 1st of October, about 11 of the clock, we came to an anchor in the Downs, where several of our owners came aboard, and after they had visited every ship, went ashore with some prisoners to examine them about our capture, etc. At 3 this morning the Essex made a signal to unmoor, and betwixt 9 and 10 weighed, he being ordered up to the buoy in the Nore, and we to make the best of our way to the Hope. October 14th. This day at 11 of the clock, we and our consort and prize got up to the Erith, where we came to an anchor, which ends our long and fatiguing voyage. Finis. End of section 20. Recording by Wayne Anderson, Chelsea, Quebec. End of A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woodes Rogers.